wanted to welcome everybody to this very important meeting. I know we've been awaiting this economic impact study that's going to be introduced today. But I did want to give some very special welcomes to those that are here. We've got Chief Deputy Nick Tennyson here from NCDOT, and we're real excited to have him here today, and I appreciate your being here. Additionally, we've got NCDOT board member Gus Tullis. Keep going. I did get an email from Jimmy Dixon, and he said he unfortunately would not be able to attend today, that he had to take, I think, one of his daughters for some doctor's work. At any rate, additionally, we've got Durwood Stevenson here. Durwood, we appreciate your taking your time to come to this. We have got a representative from Congressman Holding's office, Alice McCall. Is that correct? Would you raise your hand, Alice? There you go. Thank you so much for being here today. Of course, Dr. Paula Dowell with Cambridge Systematics will be making our presentation today, and we appreciate your making a special trip today to give us this. But I really wanted to give a real warm welcome to a gentleman that started his position today. He comes to Wayne County with over 30 years experience in transportation. Our new Gateway Director, and let's give him a hand, Gateway Director Alfred Fontana. Thank you. I need a motion from the members here in regards to approval of our February the 27th minutes.
Move for adoption.
Move adoption. I got a second on that. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye. At this point, I would like to introduce Dr. Paula Dowell. She will give us a much-awaited U.S. Highway 70 117 Interstate 795 Economic Impact Assessment Study presentation. In the interest of time, we're going to limit the questions because we've got a lot to attend to today. So if there are really pressing questions, then we'll entertain one or two of those. But we'll ask you and Paula to stay after the meeting, and she'll be here as long as you may want to answer any questions that you may have. But let's try to limit our questions if we can so we can move on with the program. Dr. Dowell.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It's a beautiful day to be here in Eastern North Carolina, so really always enjoy my time here. What I'm presenting today is going to be really an overview of the study. We are working on finalizing the reports. We wanted to make this presentation to everyone. It'll be the first time that we're really discussing the 117-795 study, and we wanted to make sure we could incorporate any comments or anything that we received. And then depending on any comments that we get following today's meeting, we'll be wrapping up the report, and that'll be ready to go out at the end of next week. And our process will be sending it to Durwood and then distribution beyond that. Okay. Here we go. So our agenda today, what I wanted to do is just kind of walk everyone through a very high level of the study process, and then talk about the role of 117 and 795. And I'm going to start at kind of a high level, really put it into perspective in what we're seeing going on nationally and globally, and then bringing it down more to that local level as well. And then we'll talk about the economic impact findings. We'll get to the numbers, which is why everyone's here today. So for the study process, again, just the overview of this is one of the first things that we did was really look at and document the economic structure. So we wanted to look at the current structure, but that also included taking a look back and looking historically. And by doing that, what we did was really what we call an economic base study, and it was looking at how your economic structure has changed over time, and that allowed us to identify the industries that were really performing well compared to rest rest of the state and rest of the nation, but it also identified some opportunities where maybe you had declining industries, and then looking at those emerging industries as well. And so between the location quotient and the shift share analysis, we're really able to look at what are your basic or your wealth generating industries, and then where are you really net importers. From that, we identified the highway dependent industries, both in the businesses and the assets. And so when we looked at the highway dependent industries, this really came from the economic base analysis that we did, but we also did a series of interviews and focus groups as well, and we'll talk more about those, which was really our next step. So we did the interviews, the focus groups, and the surveys. This included elected officials, it included economic development, both local and regional, but it also included talking to the businesses on the ground, the shippers, the folks who really use the highway system as a critical input to their business process. And then we started to quantify the change relevant to the current levels. And so what we wanted to do was really look at how might the improvements to this corridor really impact future traffic flows. And so from that, we used traffic forecasts that were developed by NCDOT as part of their feasibility study process that they're currently going through. And then really looked at how does travel time and how does transportation costs change both with and without the improvements. And then we use that as inputs into our economic model. And for this particular study, we used a model that's developed by Regional Economic Model Incorporated. We first used this project, our firm did, on the I-95 corridor, and it was a custom-built model for Eastern North Carolina that included the rest of the state as well. So it was a statewide economic model that allowed us to see if you change one thing in the state, such as transportation costs, how does everything else change in relation to that? And how does that change your forecast of future economic activity? Okay. So that in a nutshell is kind of our major steps in terms of our study process. What we're really trying to do with this particular study, and really with any of these types of economic studies, is to document the trade-offs. And it's not to say, you know, to really just market it, even though I'm sure that you guys, there will be some folks in the room that will do that, but it really provides some information for decision-making going forward. And what we want to look at in terms of the trade-off is we always look at a no-build situation where you're not going to make the investments and compare that under the situations where you do make the investments. So under the no build, you can expect that with the forecast and your population and your employment, that you're going to have more traffic on the road. And if you're not making the improvements, this can lead to increased travel costs, increased crashes or incidents, as well as reduced market access, because as you start to get more congested and your travel times take longer, you basically shrink the effective distance that you can get to within a day's market time or within a 45-minute commute time. And so it shrinks your market access. However, if you build, there could also be potential traffic diversion that maybe from the induced traffic really brings traffic in from other areas. There could also be the redistribution of development. And so we wanted to make sure when we're looking at the trade-offs that we're really measuring net new gains to the economy and not just what's going to be redistributed around the area. And then we can compare this to the build. Again, once you build, you can have the reduced travel costs. If you're making the investment and you're making travel more efficient throughout the region, you can have increased safety. And that was one of the things that we heard as we talked to the stakeholders and everything about the current condition of the facility, our safety concerns. And then improved connectivity and access. And to me, for this particular project, when you're talking about completing that 795 loop, where you're going to be connecting I-95 and I-40, which are both major national trade corridors, that access and connectivity is really vital. Okay. So in terms of conducting the economic modeling, and I promise this isn't going to be a course and there's going to be no test at the end. What we'll do is really look at the business costs. So we're going to look at how do business costs change, both if you don't make the investment and how does it change when you do make the investment. and we'll look at the change in the access, and then we'll look at the change in the local traffic. How does it change the local travel patterns? And then we'll input those, we'll monetize the value of those, put them into the economic model, and then we'll look at some key measures. And the measures that we're really focusing on are going to be gross regional product, which is what we use to measure the overall size of the economy. And then we'll look at jobs, and we'll look at income. Okay, so once again, input into the analysis, we had our interviews here, and we had our partner, Sanford Holzhauser Economic Development Group, helping us, and they conducted a lot of the one-on-one interviews with the counties and the municipalities and the regional economic development organizations, and then we at Cambridge Systematics led the interviews with the shippers. Following those interviews, we wanted to make sure that we could reach and touch as many folks as we could and really get input and kind of vet what we thought we were hearing from the interviews to make sure that what we were hearing was getting translated properly. And so we held focus groups, and this was a combined effort between our two firms, and we came down, and some of you around the room attended some of those focus group meetings and were certainly part of the interview process. And then we had our secondary data research where we just went and pulled all the numbers, and this included stuff from the U.S. Census, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bureau of Economic Analysis, but we also pulled a lot of information from North Carolina Department of Commerce as well. Okay. So then we want to talk about really the role of 117 and 795. And I wanted to start with kind of that big picture look and think about it from the importance of highway transportation and logistics. And these figures are hot off the press. They come from the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, which is really one of the top private sector organizations for supply chain managers at the nation's largest and smallest firms. Really a great organization, and they do a lot of research for the industry, and their research is based upon surveying their membership. So this is information, and the data and statistics are drawn from surveys from actual manufacturers and shippers within the U.S. So this is looking at logistics cost as a percentage of GDP, and it tracks it back from 2004 all the way through 2013. And you can see that it's been relatively constant there. You had some spikes up there around the 2006, 2007. Then during the recession, we started to see that come down a little bit, and then it's starting to get up and level off about average where it's been. These were just released in a report on June 2014. So like I said, they're really hot off the press, and you'll probably see a lot more quotes coming out from this particular report. U.S. firms spent almost $1.4 trillion on logistics cost in 2013. And when you look at logistics cost, the way they're defining that is in transportation cost and then inventory carrying cost. Okay, so the carrying costs were up about 2.8% over 2012 levels. So inventory carrying costs rose 2.8% over 2012. Transport cost rose 2% over 2012. And then your total logistics costs are up about 2.3%. So you think about how much firms are spending on logistics costs, and you start to see that rise. And when you think about highways and an investment such as 795 and how that might impact these types of numbers, and that comes into play through congestion, through safety cost, and through access. So what can improving logistics do for you in terms of really an economic development tool? Well, one, logistics and transportation industry in and of itself is a major employment industry. And so there are a lot of jobs generating, and it's one of the fastest growing industries whenever you start to look at that from a nationwide perspective. And there's a huge shortage within a lot of the occupations and the positions that fall within that industry as well. It has significant growth potential because, as we know, global trade continues to grow, and we have this insatiable demand for all these consumer goods that we have. And as the economy continues to click along and climb its way out, the freight shipments and the need for logistics and transportation are closely correlated with economic activity. It's also a key input for all industries. So when we think about logistics and transportation, a lot of times we think about, ag industry, we think about manufacturing, we think about construction, because they're all moving lots of stuff. But let's not forget about the healthcare industry and think about the goods and the types of things that they're moving and how vital and critical those things are. The education industry moves a lot of goods. If you have regional education facilities in your community, there are a lot of shipments. And sometimes regional hospitals can get upwards to 100 shipments a day. A lot of them may be small package, but they're still shipments, and that's still goods, and they're very time sensitive and very valuable. And it also impacts our cost of living. So it matters to you and I. It matters to everyone sitting here, because the more it costs to transport something, the more it's going to cost us to buy it. We all see that real instantly at the grocery store when fuel prices skyrocket, right? The price of cereal goes up. You ever wonder why cereal goes up so much more sometimes than other stuff? They're shipping a lot of air when they ship those things. And when you think about a truckload of cereal, you're going to cube out, you're going to fill up that volume of truck way before you ever hit the weight limit. And so it's costing a lot more to move that stuff around. Okay, so in terms of the growth potential, the reason it's important, it has a lot of growth potential, and these figures come from Federal Highway Administration from their freight analysis framework, and you can look there just between 2020 and 2035, and these figures were actually updated last year, and so it was right as we were coming out of the recession, and it's about time for them to update the forecast again. But as you can see, a significant increase there in the volume of goods that are going to be moved nationally. So positioning your region to be a key part of that national supply chain is critical in terms of really making sure you can meet the transportation and logistics demand of all of your industries. Transportation and warehousing also equals quality jobs. A lot of times folks look at it and say, oh, it's just a bunch of forklift operators. How much money can that be? But it's really a whole lot more. And this is some information from salary.com. You can also go on to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you'll get very similar types of studies. But the median salaries for some of the various occupations, and I think that, anywhere from a dispatcher down to a fleet manager, and even that forklift operator, there are probably a lot of people out there that wouldn't mind making $31,000 a year. So, and when you compare this to some of your manufacturing jobs, they stack up very nicely, and on average, they can be about 20 to 30% higher. Some of these salaries can than some of the manufacturing, depending on how skilled it is. And then transportation matters to all industries. And this is actually just a bubble chart to kind of give you some clues there. We have it at the different modes and then the broad sectors there. There's actually other information that will tell you down to the dollar, give you estimates on for every dollar of output produced in industry A, this is how much they spend on trucking transportation, how much on rail, on water, on air, and break it down. So that information is out there. So we've kind of summarized that at this high level here. But you'll say, once again, your healthcare and social services there, how dependent upon, transportation they are. So the role of US 117 and 795, kind of bringing it back down to this regional and eastern North Carolina perspective, is it's access to workforce for your employers. And so when employers are locating, they want to know from where can I draw workforce? And to the extent to where you can improve the efficiency and reduce travel times, you increase the geographic scope of your workforce. Most of us say, we don't come and say, I'm willing to drive 20 miles back and forth to work. That's as much as I'm willing to commute. What do? We normally say how much time we're willing to spend driving, right? So we're willing to drive, 30 minutes is my maximum commute. I think nationwide, kind of a buffer there is about 45 minutes. Some areas it can get up to 60 minutes. And of course, everyone's going to have that different threshold. But if you can increase the efficiency and the connectivity, you can actually reduce travel times, and thus that 45-minute commute time threshold will allow employers to reach more potential employees. So that expands the labor force from which they can draw. And we all know that in all business location decisions, access to labor is one of the #1 components to that. So transportation plays an important role in determining that access to labor. And especially in rural areas where you're not so densely populated, it becomes even more vital to be able to provide and expand that geographic reach for catchment. For your residents and for trying to attract populations, it's important because it can provide them access to more employment opportunities within their commute threshold. So they may be able to live somewhere with this improvement that before was off their chart because it didn't meet their commute threshold. It would take them too long to get to work. And so it benefits from both the employer side, but also from the attraction of potential rooftops. The access to I-40 and I-95, this is critical and important, especially for industries that are going to be either receiving goods or shipping goods out of the gateways, whether that be Norfolk going up north or some of the other ports up north, or whether it be Wilmington using 40 to get there, or even going down to Charleston or Savannah. So the fact that you have this connectivity and it provides more efficient access to multiple gateways is a huge economic development strength for the region. And both 40 and 95 are critical gateways. Every time we talk to a lot of the shippers, we'll say, why did you locate here? And they'll say, well, because it can get me access to 95. And then that's the whole eastern seaboard, and we all have heard the statistics on the population reach and everything from that. It also provides access to regional education facilities, which are vital to the area. And again, that's important from the standpoint of attracting population, but also from attracting employers, because that's where your skilled labor force can come from and some of their training programs that they may be looking for. And then a potential evacuation alternative as well, as we start to see more and more storms and natural disasters. Having those relief routes is also becoming more critically important. So what we wanted to look at was first, because what we're trying to do within the study, and when we talk about the economic impact, what we're trying to do here is really isolate the incremental growth that would be projected if you were to make the investment. So we wanted to first of all understand, how is the region projected to grow just as it is now? And so when we looked at the population forecast, and again, this comes from North Carolina Office of State Budget and Management, you can see that we've broken it down there to 2010 to 2020 and then 2020 to 2030. And along the corridor, all of the counties along the corridor are forecast to experience some growth there going forward. And so what we're trying to do, what our study does, we have that baseline forecast of growth from an employment, from a population, from overall size of the economy, already in the economic model. And when we model these changes in transportation costs, what the RIMI model then does is tell us, how does this change from that baseline forecasted growth? Employment by industry, if we start to look here, and remember we've talked about the relative importance of transportation to different industry sectors here, but if you see down here, manufacturing, the wholesale and retail trade, construction, all of those are very important industries within the corridor. All of those happen to be the same industries where firms spend a higher percentage of their total cost on transportation. So that means transportation matters more when they're making their expansion and location decisions. And just coming from some of our interviews and our focus groups, wanted to pull out some of the kind of the key findings of that. There's over 100 employers representing over 11,000 employees that are located just within the corridor, and that's within a very narrow definition. It's not even the whole counties of the corridor, but really just within that corridor, and that corridor is the primary facility served. Industries that depend upon the corridor include agribusiness, food and food processing, pharmaceutical, healthcare. There's also education. That's not all of them, but those are some of the ones that really rose to the top in terms of their overall size as measured by number of employees. We also heard Wilson, Wayne, and Duplin counties all have existing industrial parks that really utilize the corridor, and the corridor is part of their marketing strategy for those particular parks. And then we heard that in Sampson County, they're currently marketing a 279-acre site That's at I-40 and exit 355, which is close to the corridor, and that corridor could play a role, especially with the completion. Could add some additional marketing potential there. Some of the emerging industries, as we did our economic base analysis and we looked where you had some competitive strengths, and these were industries that were growing faster in your region than the rest of the state and then the rest of the nation. And so after we took into account the national change in employment, the national trend, your trend indicated that you were actually on a more upward climb. And this included transportation and warehousing, financing and insurance and administrative, waste management services, and professional services. So once again, 2 of these are very heavily involved in terms of trucking and freight movement. The other 2 involve moving a lot of people. So with all of these industries, the corridor could play a very important role. So now moving into the actual economic impact analysis. We did here, this was the traffic forecasts were based upon North Carolina DOT forecast, and we actually received these forecasts from the central office in Raleigh. And they gave us forecasts for 4 different alternatives that were being evaluated at the time. And these came to us probably in April, May, the forecast is when we got them. So I know that it was from a preliminary feasibility study. And these things are a little bit of a moving target as they go through the planning process. They tend to get more and more detailed each step of the way. So we averaged the four alternatives, understanding that each of those could be tweaked going forward and everything. So we weren't just analyzing one specific alternative, and it was never our goal to analyze and compare the alternatives across one another for this particular study. So the impact categories that we were looking at, first of all, we wanted to look at what we call direct user impacts. And these are the impacts, these are the changes that accrue directly to the people using the facility. And that's in terms of travel time. How does it change travel time? Vehicle operating cost, and for this we look at both fuel cost and non-fuel cost. We look at the safety cost. Reliability, and with reliability, one of the things that we really looked at there was in terms of buffer time, how much buffer time do you have to add, because you never know how long it's going to take you. And on some facilities, they have more reliability issues than others. This becomes really important when you're talking about, for example, trucking, and they're trying to make more than 1 delivery a day, if they're trying to get 2 or 3 turns on their truck a day. But in order to do that, you know, they have to make every delivery kind of on time, and they don't have a lot of buffer time between those. And so really kind of digging down and understanding how reliable the system is, and if you increase that, does that really allow you to do anything more? And then looking at just the overall traffic volumes. Okay. And then these direct impacts, we wanted to really figure out, how does it impact the business competitiveness? So how does it change the productivity? And here we're really talking about a lot of your truck productivity and your inventory carrying costs. How does it allow you to manage your supply chain better? And then how does it change market access? Does it change, once again, your labor market access? And does it also change your 1-day and 2-day drive time access? And then just in terms of overall business costs. And the business cost isn't just for moving goods, it's also people. If you go into the office and you leave the office and have to attend a meeting, then that's on the clock time. And so the longer it takes you, then the more it costs. Okay. And then once we're able to monetize the impacts on business competitiveness, we then look at that, we then input those into the economic model and look at the economic impact again in terms of, I use gross domestic product to gross regional product, same thing, it's just talking about different geographies there. And then employment and income. Okay. Some of the economic modeling inputs, again, and all of this will be very detailed within our technical report, but we talk about vehicle miles traveled, and the VMT, you'll see that a lot, and that's really just a measure of the distance people are traveling. So if this allows you to reduce the distance, then it could cut down on your vehicle operating costs. It may take less fuel to make the same trip. And then we have vehicle hours traveled, and again, this is a measure of the time spent, and so this is directly used to calculate the change in travel time. And then we look at vehicle operating cost, and once again, the fuel and the non-fuel vehicle costs are there. We also have our data sources over here as well. For our vehicle costs, we use AAA. They do a report for each state every year that looks at the cost of driving. And then we also have American Transportation Research Institute. They're the not-for-profit research arm of the American Trucking Associations. They actually do the cost of trucking report every year, and they break it down by category. And so those were our sources for that. And then once again, the user impact there, which we've talked about. Some of our key assumptions, I won't walk through all of these, but just want everyone, we try to be as transparent as we can so that everyone knows and understands what's driving this. And you'll see the passenger trip purpose, and this is really important here because sometimes when you have travel time savings, it represents real out-of-pocket savings, so there's real cash value to it. And sometimes there's no cash value, it's just what we call an opportunity cost. So if you and I, like on our commute, it's the opportunity cost that we could be spending that time doing something else. And so we can still value that, but because it's not a real monetary exchange, we don't enter that value into the economic model. And you'll see where I report that separately. Now, if you're doing a benefit cost analysis for something, say maybe one of the National Tiger grants or maybe through some other state program, in terms of a public sector benefit cost analysis, then those travel time savings that represent opportunity cost do get counted toward a benefit cost analysis. And then the passenger value of time, you'll see the monetary values that we actually placed on that to come up with the dollars that we have. And then the same thing with the passenger vehicle operating cost, and then the freight crew vehicle operating cost, and then our value of time as well as the vehicle operating cost. So all of our assumptions and all of the data and the inputs will be laid out in the actual report. So once we monetize those savings and then we distribute them across the different industries and understood who was going to be saving that money, we input it into the REMI model, and we found that, one, there's going to be, we projected between 2020 and 2040, there would be about $74 million in business transportation cost savings along the corridor. There would be about $568 million in resident and visitor travel time saving. That's that non-monetary opportunity cost. If you put a value on that, that's the value that would go into a benefit cost. But once again, we didn't include this in any of our economic impact numbers. Okay. This translates into, as your businesses save that $74 million, it frees up resources to be spent in other ways and actually leads to about a $520 million increase, and this is in the aggregate over all 20 years, in your gross regional product. And then it also results in faster employment growth. Remember, these are all incremental, above and beyond your baseline forecast of growth. And so an average of an additional 220 jobs annually, and if you sum all of those jobs up, like if the job was created in year 2020 and it's sustained every year through 2040, that same job, then that's the equivalent of 20 job years, okay? Because a job is good. If it can last, it's even better, right? And so we're not just talking about construction jobs that you get hired, you build it, and then when it's done, then the job goes away once the project's done. We're really talking about these are long-term economic gains. And so these 220 average annual jobs would equate to about 4,450 in terms of job years over the life of this of the study period. And this nets about $490 million in terms of your increase in income. Okay, so once again, what it's really helping the regions do, you already have a forecast for growth, but it's going to help you grow faster and be more competitive as a result of the transportation efficiencies, as a result of the increased connectivity and the accessibility. So some of the key takeaways here is if you don't build, there are some consequences of not building. So it's not just, is this worth building because we're going to get these additional things, but if you don't build, then there will be an increase in your transportation cost. And what that increase in transportation cost suggests that you would grow by about 80 fewer jobs on average per year. Completing I-75 results in $74 million in business cost savings for existing users, which then gives rise to about $520 million in additional GRP. The increasing efficiency, accessibility, and connectivity translates into over 220 additional jobs on average per year. And then it enhances the competitiveness of the region and provides greater access to the Port of Wilmington. So the impacts are not just constrained to the geographic location of the corridor. There are benefits that trickle over into other parts of the state as well. And you also support your existing business, but you make the region more competitive in terms of attracting new and some of those emerging industries. Okay, and then that wraps it up for me.
Questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
All right.
I like your model. It sounds good, but it wasn't clear whether you include railroads and ports as part of your transportation and the effect they have when they're properly used.
Within the model, normally where you would pick up some of the railroad model would be in your travel demand modeling process. And because we were using the traffic forecast from NCDOT, we did not run the statewide travel demand model for this particular study. So we didn't get that interaction. But I think certainly qualitatively, we can talk about any time that you have the more seamless your multimodal system is, then the more advantageous that's going to be.
What's also, in my mind, would make a significant economic change. And you only mentioned Wilmington Port one time. Do you add weight for routes that go to ports?
Yes, certainly, and again, that's where we looked at the access, and so we looked at how would it change the access to the Port of Wilmington for the region, and we're really looking at kind of that one-day access market and stuff, and so looking at how that changes.
Let me hasten to say we have 2 ports.
I know. Yeah, and we just finished the US 70. One of the other things too that we did was we looked at the numbers and everything that we see here. We presented the US 70 corridor back several weeks ago, and that didn't include any improvements to 117-795. This analysis here doesn't include the improvements to US 70. So what we wanted to do next is take, what if you did these together, and then all of a sudden you really have increased your access to both of your ports, and you start to look at that geographic scale of where you're really starting to do that. But I think that, I would hasten to just focus on the ports here in North Carolina. I mean, I know that they, state priority and everything, but when you're talking to a lot of your shippers in eastern North Carolina, the Port of Norfolk is awfully darn important. So maintaining, competitive access to the Port of Norfolk is also, from an economic development perspective, really critical for eastern North Carolina.
Could I get you to go back several of your screens there, back to the actual impact, because
To the numbers?
to the numbers.
Okay.
What I'm gathering from that, I want to clarify that, to get some emphasis on that, and that's at the bottom line there, 490 million increase in income. Are you saying from this study that if we do not build, it's going to cost our area $500 million in income?
That's the opportunity cost not associated. Now, is it going to go, are you going to lose that from your baseline forecast? No, but it just means that it's your foregone benefits.
But if you do build, it
That's
will
right,
add $500 million in income in this area.
Yeah, so that's the foregone benefit if you don't do the
Now,
improvement.
I think that really is the big headline, and that is $490 million in increase in income.
Well, have one. Back on a slide you were doing, I think, from 2010 to 2020 and then 2020 to 20. You talking about population growth? You had several counties up there, right there. I wanted to know what was the reason that Dukeman made the big jump over the rest of the counties. I was just, that's a huge.
Because you opened your farming operation.
You know, I'll have to go back to the source there. We didn't actually generate these projections, but I think we can, there's certainly the source there, and they may have some narrative on what they think is really driving those.
Connecting the dots and just money, if 795 more completed above Goldsboro, I was just wondering because of the completed on down, that might have been a factor in what the growth might be with more access to transportation. That's why I was
Well, certainly when we talk about attracting, you know, rooftops and everything, I mean, you know, you have the huge, you know, Raleigh-Durham area and everything as your economic engine, and so access to that region is also important, and to the extent to where you can expand the access, and as that region starts to grow out, then, you know, it really does open up the door. Now, you know, I will tell you that there were some folks when we were doing the US 70 interviews over closer to the coast, we did get some people who were concerned that, you know, completing 795 would be such a boom for the counties along the corridor that it may somehow create this kind of wall of development, that everything would want to be right there because of the great access that you would have to both 40 and 95, and that, you know, it would be a wall and none would trickle back. But I think that's where you come in and you really start pulling in, you know, the ports and the whole assets, and you look at the region as a whole, to try to make sure that, you know, those benefits do spill over.
One last question.
On this same chart, it's a little surprising that Wilson is showing a negative increase in growth.
No, actually, it's not a negative. What it's showing is that it's just a change in the growth. You're going to slow. The growth is going to slow a little bit, but you're still going to be growing by 7.2% over that time period. So you're just slowing down a little bit. Okay. No, I mean, this is pretty robust population growth in general. It's just breaking it down into 2 time periods.
Thanks so much.
All right.
She's going to be here as long as she needs to in order to answer any of your questions after the meeting today. And thank you so much. Let's give her a big hand.